A dying Confederate soldier whispered coordinates to a local mountain family in 1865, coordinates they've never shared with anyone. But last month, someone started digging in those exact spots. How did they know? When Richmond fell in April 1865, Confederate leaders didn't just pack their bags and call it quits, they grabbed something far more valuable than their dignity. Gold, lots of it. Jefferson Davis and his crew fled the Confederate capital with a treasure that would make modern billionaires jealous. We're talking gold coins, silver bars, and precious items worth millions in today's money. The exact amount? Well, that's where things get interesting. Some records suggest it could have been anywhere from $500,000 to over $1 million in 1865 currency. Do the math and you're looking at tens of millions today. The escape wasn't exactly smooth sailing. Union soldiers were breathing down their necks, closing in fast from every direction. Picture this: Confederate officials frantically loading wagons with heavy chests while cannons boomed in the distance. Not your typical moving day. But here's where it gets wild. They actually made it to Danville, Virginia, about 140 miles south of Richmond. For a brief moment, Danville became the last official capital of the Confederacy. Think about that. A small tobacco town suddenly hosting what remained of a crumbling nation and its entire treasury. In Danville, they did something smart. They counted everything. Every gold piece, every silver dollar, every valuable item got recorded. The Confederate officials knew exactly what they had. Makes sense, right? You don't want to lose track of a fortune during wartime chaos. Then there's the human element that makes this story even crazier. These weren't just nameless government officials. Real people with families were responsible for moving this massive fortune. Treasury workers, guards, and Confederate leaders all knew they were carrying the South's last hope for funding their cause. The pressure must have been incredible. Union forces were gaining ground every hour, and here they were, literally carrying the weight of the Confederacy on their shoulders. Some of these men probably hadn't slept in days, constantly looking over their shoulders for blue uniforms. What's fascinating is how organized they tried to stay despite the chaos. Even while fleeing, they maintained records and attempted to follow proper procedures. The Confederate government might have been falling apart, but they weren't going to lose track of their gold without a fight. After their brief stop in Danville, the treasure convoy prepared to move again. The plan was to head further south, maybe link up with remaining Confederate forces or find a safe place to regroup. They loaded up those heavy wagons one more time, said goodbye to their temporary capital, and rolled out into the Virginia countryside. And the weird part is, that's when everything went sideways. Once they left Danville and started moving toward Greensboro, North Carolina, the whole situation became a complete mystery. The organized retreat turned into something else entirely, something that would puzzle historians for over 150 years. What happened next on that dusty road would create one of America's greatest treasure hunting legends. After Confederate President Jefferson Davis and his officials left Danville with their precious cargo, something strange happened. The treasure that had been so carefully counted and documented just days before seemed to evaporate like morning fog. One day there were detailed records of gold coins, silver bars, and valuable bonds worth millions in today's money. The next day, nothing but questions and conflicting stories. The journey from Danville toward Greensboro, North Carolina, should have been straightforward enough. But here's where things get interesting. Multiple witnesses saw the wagons rolling south, heavy with their golden burden. Then somewhere along those dusty roads, the trail went completely cold. It's like watching a magic trick where the magician makes an elephant disappear, except this elephant was made of gold and nobody's laughing. Union soldiers were closing in fast, creating chaos everywhere. Some historians believe federal troops caught up with parts of the Confederate convoy and seized portions of the treasure during skirmishes. Makes sense, right? Victorious armies don't usually let enemy gold slip through their fingers. But if that's true, why didn't Union records show massive gold captures? The paperwork-loving federal government documented everything else, down to captured buttons and belt buckles. Then there's the uncomfortable truth nobody wanted to talk about back then. Some of Davis's own men might have helped themselves to the treasury. When your cause is collapsing and paychecks have stopped coming, a bag of gold coins becomes awfully tempting. Several Confederate officials simply vanished during the journey, along with suspiciously convenient amounts of the treasure. Loyalty has its limits when families are starving back home. Well, here's where the story gets really wild. Many researchers believe the fortune was deliberately hidden somewhere in the Blue Ridge Mountains during the chaotic retreat. The mountainous terrain offered countless hiding spots, deep caves, rocky overhangs, dense forests where a person could bury treasure and never find it again without precise landmarks. Confederate leaders knew these mountains well, and they definitely knew how to keep secrets. But why hide it instead of using it to fund their escape? The answer might be simpler than we think. Gold is heavy, really heavy. $1 million in gold coins weighs about 2 tons, and desperate men on the run can't exactly load that onto their backs. Hiding it with plans to retrieve it later makes perfect sense, assuming you survive long enough to come back. The weird part is how completely the evidence disappeared. No deathbed confessions pointing to specific locations, no detailed maps found in old family attics, no government records explaining exactly what happened to every last coin. It's almost like the earth just opened up and swallowed the entire Confederate treasury. What we do know is this millions of dollars in gold and silver entered those mountains and never came out through official channels. Whether it's still buried there waiting for discovery, or whether it was secretly recovered long ago, remains one of America's greatest unsolved mysteries. The mountains themselves aren't talking, but the legends they've spawned tell a completely different story. When Jefferson Davis and his men disappeared into the wilderness, something fascinating happened. The missing gold didn't just vanish from history books, it sprouted wings and flew straight into the heart of Appalachian folklore. Within a generation, every mountain family seemed to have a story. Grandparents whispered about Confederate soldiers burying payroll chests on moonless nights. Children grew up hearing tales of desperate men hiding fortunes before Union cavalry caught up with them. But here's the thing about mountain stories, they're like Chinese whispers played across decades. Take the legend of Bullion Ridge, a jagged spine of rock deep in the Blue Ridge Mountains. Local families swear a Confederate paymaster buried an entire regiment's wages there in 1865. The story goes that 3 soldiers dug a hole near a distinctive lightning-struck oak tree. They marked the spot with carved symbols on nearby rocks. Simple enough, right? Well, storms have toppled dozens of oak trees since then, and mountain rocks tend to look pretty similar after 150 years. Then there's the tale from Madison County, where an old woman claimed her great-uncle helped bury $50,000 in gold coins. The catch? He died of fever before revealing the exact location. She spent 30 years searching every cave and creek bed on their property, found nothing but rusty horseshoes and broken pottery. These remote mountain locations made perfect sense as hiding spots. Roads were practically non-existent back then. Dense forests provided natural camouflage. Rocky terrain offered countless caves and crevices. If you wanted to hide something valuable, the Appalachian wilderness was nature's own safety deposit box. But legends have a funny way of growing in the telling. A small bag of silver coins becomes a chest of gold bars. 3 soldiers become an entire company. A temporary hiding spot becomes a permanent treasure vault. Mountain families pass these stories down like precious heirlooms, each generation adding their own embellishments. The most persistent legend involves a group of Confederate deserters who allegedly made off with their unit's entire payroll. According to the story, they were heading home through the mountains when Union scouts spotted them. In their panic to escape, they buried the money and drew a crude map. Sounds reasonable so far. The problem? All the deserters supposedly died in a skirmish the next day, taking the secret with them. What makes these stories particularly tricky is the lack of specific details. Dates are fuzzy, locations are vague, near the big waterfall doesn't narrow things down much in a region filled with waterfalls. 3 miles from the old settlement becomes meaningless when settlements disappear and new ones spring up. Yet something keeps these legends alive. Maybe it's the romantic notion of hidden treasure waiting for the right person to find it. Or perhaps there's truth buried somewhere beneath all the embellishment. The mountain stories certainly captured imaginations, but they also sparked something more concrete, actual treasure hunts that would consume lives and fortunes for generations to come. The stories kept spreading, and people started doing something about it. Armed with shovels, metal detectors, and wild hope, treasure hunters descended on the Appalachian Mountains like moths to a flame. We're talking about over 150 years of people convinced they'd be the ones to crack the code. These weren't just weekend hobbyists either. Some folks dedicated their entire lives to the hunt. They studied old maps until their eyes went crossed, interviewed elderly locals who might have heard something from their great-grandfathers, and spent fortunes on equipment that promised to find gold buried deep underground. The cave theory became especially popular among serious hunters. Makes sense, right? Caves don't move, they're natural hiding spots, and they'd protect treasure from weather and nosy passersby. Plus, the Appalachians are absolutely riddled with caves, some mapped, others known only to locals, and plenty more probably still undiscovered. Then there's the Hardy County legend that really got people excited. According to the story, Confederate deserters made off with $440,000 in gold and hid it in a cave somewhere in the rugged terrain. That's millions in today's money, just sitting there waiting for someone smart enough to find it. The tale claimed these deserters marked the spot somehow, but good luck figuring out what rocks or trees they used as landmarks back in 1865. But here's where things get interesting and frustrating. Maps started surfacing over the decades. Hand-drawn sketches passed down through families, cryptic symbols carved into rocks, and even elaborate diagrams that looked official enough to fool anyone. Problem is, none of them worked. People followed these maps religiously, dug holes deep enough to bury a horse, and came up empty-handed every single time. The weird part is how these failed attempts only seemed to fuel more interest. Each generation produced new hunters convinced the previous ones just weren't smart enough or didn't have the right technology. Modern treasure hunters brought ground-penetrating radar, sophisticated metal detectors, and GPS systems that could pinpoint locations within inches. Some hunters formed groups, pooling resources and sharing information like they were planning a military operation. They'd camp in the mountains for weeks, systematically searching grid patterns across promising areas. Others worked alone, secretive about their methods and suspicious that everyone else was trying to steal their research. Local communities had mixed feelings about all this activity. Some welcomed the visitors and their money, selling supplies and offering guide services. Others got tired of strangers tramping through their property and asking endless questions about family stories they'd heard 100 times before. What's really wild is how the technology kept advancing, but the results stayed the same. Nothing. Better equipment just meant people could search faster and dig deeper holes in more places. The gold, if it existed, seemed to stay one step ahead of every innovation. Yet the hunts continue today because every treasure hunter believes they have something the others didn't, whether that's a new theory, better research, or just plain luck. The question remains whether they're chasing something real or just chasing ghosts through the mountains. Today's historians face a puzzle that would make Sherlock Holmes scratch his head. The Confederate gold mystery sits at that awkward intersection where documented history meets wild speculation. And frankly, sorting fact from fiction isn't getting any easier after 160 years. Here's what we know for certain. Millions of dollars in Confederate treasury funds disappeared during those chaotic final weeks of the Civil War. Records from Danville show the treasure existed. But after that, the paper trail goes colder than a mountain creek in January. Professional historians have spent decades trying to piece together what really happened. Some gold definitely went to pay soldiers their overdue wages. These men hadn't seen proper payment in months. Makes sense, right? You can't exactly ask starving soldiers to wait until after the war for their money, but even accounting for military payments, huge amounts remain unaccounted for. Then there's the human factor. Snowfall or daytime. Confederate officials fleeing south weren't saints. They were desperate men watching their world collapse. Some undoubtedly helped themselves to gold along the way. Who's going to stop them? The government they served was falling apart and survival instincts kicked in hard. The weird part is how little physical evidence exists for such massive treasure hunts. After 150 years of people digging up Appalachian mountainsides, you'd expect someone to find something significant. A few coins here and there, maybe some old artifacts. But the legendary Mother Lode, nothing that stands up to serious scrutiny. Modern treasure hunters use metal detectors that would seem like magic to Civil War soldiers. GPS technology pinpoints locations within feet. Ground-penetrating radar can spot buried objects without digging a single hole. Yet despite all this advanced equipment, the Confederate gold remains as elusive as ever. Well, maybe that tells us something important. Perhaps the treasure never made it to those remote mountain caves after all. Maybe Union soldiers did capture more than we realize, or Confederate leaders spent it before reaching Appalachia. The romantic notion of gold buried in secret mountain hideouts might be exactly that, romantic fiction. But why does this mystery refuse to die? Simple psychology explains a lot. People love the idea that enormous wealth sits waiting somewhere just beyond reach. The bigger and more impossible the treasure, the more it captures our imagination. Add the drama of America's Civil War, and you've got a story that practically writes itself. Local communities have built entire tourist industries around these legends. Gift shops sell treasure maps. Guided tours promise to show you authentic hiding spots. Everyone benefits when the mystery stays alive. Everyone except the treasure hunters spending their life savings on worthless expeditions. The truth probably isn't as exciting as the legends. Most of that Confederate gold likely ended up in very ordinary places, soldiers' pockets, Union Army coffers, or spent on basic supplies during desperate times. After more than a century of searching, maybe it's time to admit the obvious: the greatest Confederate treasure isn't buried gold, but the enduring power of an unsolved mystery.